Hey, what's up, guys? So one of the most common questions that I hear year after year is, hey, Vortex, what's the best radar detector? And I have an entire article on my website that goes over all the best options with different features and price points and whatnot. And I periodically do videos that go over all the same content as well. But in this video, I actually want to go a little bit more into the thought process behind what is it that makes something the best anyways, and well, what would actually make something the best for you? So fundamentally, when it comes to a radar detector, everybody needs two main things. Number one, you gotta have good performance, good detection, right? If there's any sort of radar being used around you, whether it's traditional radar, photo radar, constant on, instant on, whatever it is, you need to know, right? You want a detector that's gonna alert you with sufficient advance warning in case something is going on. That way you can take action. Now, the second thing that's important is also, well, staying quiet if it's not actually a threat. False alert filtering. So if it's not something that can give you a ticket, whether it's a automatic door opener or a speed sign on the side of the road or a car with blind spot monitoring radar, if it's not a threat, I want a detector that stays quiet, and everybody wants that. Good performance and good false alert filtering. That said, we're also going to start getting into maybe some subjective stuff. Like, you can test this kind of stuff. We do. Grab a ton of detectors, see what kind of range you get in different terrains and against different police radar guns, and then we look at the results from a lot of different tests to get a sense of like which ones give you the best range. But then you also need to consider, well, what's appropriate for you? If you've got really difficult situations, like you're driving in the mountains and there's curves and hills and trees and officers are using instant on radar, so their guns aren't even on the whole time, you need to make sure that you can get every ounce of detection that you can get. On the other hand, if you're driving in terrain that's just flat open terrain and officers are using constant on, your detector could be going off for 8 to 10 miles, so you can be getting 10 minutes of an alert time before you even get to the officer in the first place. So the last thing that you need is more detection range, right? And so like what's important to you is really going to depend on your specific use case. Similarly, when it comes to false alert filtering, that can be a little bit tougher to like test and quantify in the same way that range can. But I mean, for some people, if you drive for an hour, 3 false alerts could be too many. For other people, I'm like, that's amazing. That sounds great, So what's good is going to be pretty subjective. Like we can try to see, how many cars can you filter out and what is the alert like if it does false and stuff. But a lot of this is actually going to be pretty subjective too. Additionally, different people are going to want different things. Like if you have a lot of photo radar in your area, you're definitely going to want a detector that has good photo radar detection and doesn't false a lot to photo radar, so you can actually trust it when it does go off. Other people don't have photo radar in their area at all. And at best, it would be like, well, I would love to have the feature in case maybe it shows up one day, I can turn the feature on, but otherwise, I'd just leave it turned off, So that's going to depend on, again, your specific use case. Another thing to consider is maybe the stealth characteristics of a detector. Is it detectable by radar detector detectors? Most people don't need that at all, but for those who do need that feature, it's very important, and different detectors do this better than others. Same thing with just what's the overall user experience like, Does a detector, does it give you a ton of control and capability? Like for myself, I know exactly what I want, and I want a detector that's going to allow me to create exactly the experience that I'm looking for. But on the other hand, other people are like, hey, I don't want to spend all day long reading forums and learning about bands and frequencies and programming and custom signals and custom frequencies. I don't want to learn all that stuff. I just want a detector I can throw on the windshield and not have to worry about apps and programming, right? Just put it on. I got other stuff to worry about. They don't want to have to be experts to know how to use a radar detector. It should just work. And so a lot of people are going to be like that. And heck, myself, even though I can spend a lot of time tweaking a detector, sometimes I'm like, man, I just want to go for a drive. I want to enjoy the scenery, and I got my kids in the back of the car and they're asleep. Like, I just want a detector that's going to stay quiet. I got other stuff to focus on today, and just do your thing and let me focus on something else, So it really depends on kind of what you're looking for. The analogy that I always think of is like a stick shift versus an automatic in a car, right? A lot of people love driving a stick. I love a stick, It's fun to have control over the car, and the experience like that, it definitely makes it much more engaging. On the other hand, if you're stuck in traffic, an automatic can be great. And for most people, especially here in the US, they just want to drive an automatic, even though a stick can be a lot more fun, So again, it really comes down to what you need, and your needs may even change over time or depending on where you're driving or what kind of experience you're looking for. And so there's not one use case that's going to be appropriate for everybody. There's not one set of features and compromises and pros and cons that are going to be best for anybody, Deciding what's best for you, a lot of this is going to be very personal. It's going to be subjective. Are you tech savvy, or would you rather want something that's just kind of more hands-free and automated? Do you need RDD immunity? Do you need photo radar detection? How much range do you want? All that kind of stuff, it really depends on you. And so something that may be perfect for you may not be a good choice for somebody else and vice versa. So having one detector that's the best for everybody, I think is honestly a little unrealistic. It's the same reason why different people drive different cars or use different phones or listen to different types of music. Like, a lot of this is subjective. And as much as I want to be this objective tester, right? A lot of things are actually going to be subjective. They're based on what's best for you. And so when we get into the what's best question, well, a lot of that is going to be not just, which features does the detector have and how well does it perform, but also how does it go about doing that to create a certain user experience, and then what user experience do you want? What budget do you have allocated to spend toward a detector? These are things that are not going to be in a best detector comparison per se, but they're still very, very important. And so whenever I'm going into, a comparison of what's the best, and I'm sure it's the same for other people who do reviews of different like cell phones and cars and whatever, like it's the same thing. It's not exclusive to radar detectors. But a lot of times when it comes to picking what's the best, it really comes down to what's best for you. And so whenever you're reading one of my comparisons or reviews, or honestly anything else anybody else is doing, a lot of it you have to ask what's best for you. So as far as things that I think are important, long range detection, good responsiveness against brief signals, again, letting you know if there's radar in the area, you need to know. And then also the good false alert filtering, door opener, speed signs, BSMs, photo radar. Like, if it's not actually a threat or something, like, stay quiet. Traffic sensors, like, having good false alert filtering is really critical. And then some other things as far as like how plug and play it is. Does it have good RDD immunity? Does it have good photo radar detection? What's the build quality like? What's the customer service like after you buy it in case something goes wrong? How good of a job does a company do of continuing to update the detector and stay on top of new threats? All those things are really important too. But to some extent, that's beyond just a long-range test course. And on another hand, that's also like, well, a lot of that stuff can sometimes be subjective, which makes it a little bit tricky to make one single recommendation to say, this detector is the best. Maybe one day we'll have a detector that just obliterates the competition in every category. That's kind of like what Thea was supposed to be. I have no idea if or when that will come out, but it's supposed to have good RDD immunity and longer range and everything else, and it doesn't false to BSMs, and it's got arrows, and it's got Bluetooth and an open API, and like the source code itself should be open source. You can customize the detector. Like, it should do everything. And that was why I guess it's been kind of a bummer to see it just delayed indefinitely due to part shortages and supply chains and all that kind of stuff. But maybe a detector like Thea could come out one day that could be better than everything else in every category. Okay, I'm sure there's going to be other detectors that are still better in something else, like maybe being a better bang for the buck or costing less, which is great too. Cool. But, maybe one day we'll have a detector that we can just say, this is better than everything else. Even like with laser jammers, the ALP, I think, is better than just about everything else. It's not perfect. It's got pros and cons. And I think that even though the ALP is as good as it is, there's still other jammers that in certain situations may actually be a better pick, whether it's a Stinger, TMG, an Escort, whatever. A lot of those jammers in specific use cases, which may be your use case and maybe somebody else's, I think another jammer would be better. But even the ALP being as good as it is, and having the track record that it does, I don't think even that one is the best for everybody. So again, this is really going to vary on your specific use case. And so whenever we're getting into the discussion of like, what's the best, it's never really a simple, straightforward answer. It's always like, well, it depends, And so that makes it tougher for me as a reviewer, and I'm sure it makes it tougher for you as well, just trying to get a simple answer without having to spend a ton of time on forums and read lots of reviews and articles and see different reviewers are going to have different opinions and different perspectives, so different people will recommend different things. They're going to have different opinions. I've got my preferences, I've got my opinions, but what I like is not going to be appropriate for everybody else. I don't think it's supposed to be. I'm trying to kind of sit back and think about everybody's going to have slightly different needs. Let's kind of go over different needs. And that, I think, is really what we're getting into here is it depends. It's not simple. It's not straightforward. And man, I wish it was. That would make my life so much easier. And I'm sure that would make your life easier as well. But that's just not the reality. And so in the meantime, we're looking at everything. We're looking at all the objective test data with different guns and different terrains and different situations against different frequencies. We're looking lots of different people's experiences and seeing what the reliability is like with hundreds of different owners of different detectors, and trying to get as much information as possible and trying to then condense all that into a really simple answer that's not too oversimplified to give you all the relevant information without making it an hour-long review. It's like, how do you find that balance? That's kind of tough. And so It's an interesting thing, spending years trying to answer a question of what's the best radar detector and not being able to give a straightforward answer to it because it's more complicated than you would think, for better or for worse. And so, yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on this whole what's the best discussion. Very subjective, simple question without a simple answer. So despite my efforts of trying to be like objective, there's way more to it than just the objective test data. I think that's just part of the overall thought process and what you need to consider when you're choosing a detector or a cell phone or a car or anything else, right? A lot of it is dependent more on what you need. And I can't cover what everybody needs in every single use case, but again, here's kind of some of the most common ones depending on this is an important feature, this does it better, this does better, and then based on where you drive, maybe these drivers will need these features versus those drivers would need those features, So you try to dial that in as much as you can, but still, it's a surprisingly complicated thing to do to give a simple answer. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys are all doing great, and I'll see you in the next video.